Heidi. Thanks for joining in.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
I hope you are sitting on your front porch or something. It's like one of the most beautiful mornings I can remember in a long time.
I know it was really beautiful out. I did have coffee on the deck, so that's good.
Good. Well, I'm in the training room with Zam. Did I pronounce that right? Okay, you trick us all with how you spell your name, but I thought I remembered it right. And Heidi, you'll have to refresh my memory. When we did this together before, did we do buyer or seller boot camp?
We did a purchase agreement.
That's right. Okay, good. So I think that was probably buyer. And that's what Zam did as well. So I am going to share my screen and let's see here. Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good, how are you? Long time no see.
Good. I know. I'm like, you have to remember, you have to remind me your name,
Tara.
You've been a realtor for a very long time, but you just redid your license.
Well, I've moved it over here. Yeah.
Good. Nice to see you.
Tara, friends with Taylor.
I totally remember that. Yes,
Yes.
and Tasha Wells. And
Yes.
I just write your name down here.
Thank you.
This is Zam. I don't know if you've
Hi.
met
I
before.
think we have met. Hello,
She
I'm Tara.
recently graduated from college, if I'm remembering that right.
Oh, fun.
And just got a real estate license. And then we have a new agent, Heidi, on as well. So
Do you want me to put the date on
is
here?
perfect. Oh, yes, thank you. Perfect. I'm kind of casual today, which is, I mean, on a Saturday, why not, right? But I normally wear like a little dress or something, but I went to Pilates this morning.
Oh, how was it?
Fabulous. I go to Pilates every Tuesday. I go regularly in the morning, and I told them my goal for the summer is to go to Pilates twice a week. So I went to Pilates this morning, but more importantly, last night I hosted an annual get together at my house that I host every May, and it was so fun. I was up way too late. I think you all know what that means. So if I'm not putting all my sentences together, full disclosure, that's why. But I am just going to start right in. Now that everyone knows who's who in the room and who's who online, I'm just going to start right in and go to North Star MLS. So, Tara, tell me. I have not talked with Taylor in so long, actually. Shutterfly just reminded me, 6 years ago we went to Las Vegas together.
Oh, yeah?
And she had never been, and so we took her, and we showed her around, and we went to like a nightclub that had a concert with Marshmello. And Marshmello is like kind of a big deal, right? But at the time that it was not, and we were like, who is this guy, and why is he wearing this mask, and like what exactly is going on here? But I literally just yesterday got with Taylor and thought, I need to reach out to her. Have you talked to her?
She was in town a couple weeks ago. We went out. So she'll come home every so often.
Yeah, see her family.
Living in Arizona now.
Oh, they moved there?
She moved there.
Oh, she's not together.
No.
Shoot. She just does not have luck in that.
Her choice.
Okay.
So you know
wow.
what? We're all for queen moves. So
yeah, exactly.
I support that.
Good for her and you. Yes. Absolutely. The Taylor that we're talking about, just so everyone else on the call knows, as I'm killing time as I log into North Star MLS, is I have through the years in real estate had such an unusual schedule, just like a really hard, unusual schedule. And so we just hired nannies, like when my daughter's 13, older daughter's 13, and when we first were having her, of course you go around and you kind of interview, you know, like daycare centers and what are we gonna do? Should we do an in-home? Should we do a center? And then we just ended up hiring a nanny who would work. We usually had them work until like 9 p.m. sometimes, and then almost always at least one weekend day, like a Saturday or Sunday. And you know, I mean, you kind of have to do that when you're in real estate because people so often want to have an open house or want to look at houses on the weekends. And then I would give myself a day during the week where I could stay home a full day with my child to give kind of the trade-off and take them to like early childhood family education and stuff. But I did that for 20 years, and then perhaps you've heard the background, but just to reiterate, I did that for 20 years, and then I turned 40. I had all these things happening that I was like, I think there's just a different way of doing life. I wanted to stay in real estate, but I had gone to middle school with Olivia, who's the owner, operating principal here. And I just shared with her, I was like, I feel like I'm not present enough for my kids. And I'm always running so many different directions. I feel like I want to do this better. She's like, well, Keller Williams does everything better. So let me put you through the career visioning here. And I just evolved into a way of still being able to sell real estate, but working in partnership with this woman named Lisa, who does a lot of the evening and weekend appointments for me. And then I'm here in the office every day from 9:30 until 2:30, which is a really good schedule because it allows my girls to get, out the door and settled. And then it allows me to pick them up from school and do their homework with them. So I'm like, becoming a student again, relearning all that hard stuff, algebra and whatnot. So I am still actively selling real estate, which I think is a benefit to you guys as your broker because I do these forms, nearly every day, and I see what it's like being out showing houses, and I feel what it's like with the consumers who are struggling to make their decisions right now because it's a tricky real estate market. But as your broker, I have exposure to some of the challenging situations of all 200 realtors here. And I think that's, I call that my MBA in real estate over the last couple of years because it's a really unique thing to be able to see how interesting and complex situations can get. And so I've learned a lot over the past couple of years, and I have a wealth of knowledge now as a broker, and I absolutely love it. One of my responsibilities as your broker is to make sure that you understand all the forms and the contract documents that you'll be explaining to all of your buyers and sellers. And so today, Tara, we're going to go over seller documents. And I know you've listed a handful of houses, so this will definitely be repetitive and redundant to you, but I appreciate you being here. Yeah, I appreciate you being here because even myself, let's just say I list one house a month. If you don't list a house for 2 months, you can get a little rusty. You can feel a little, unsure with exactly how to talk through these. So what I'd like for the purpose of today is for me to explain these documents to you in depth so that you can make sure and feel confident when you go and explain these to a seller. And then, as I think you guys all know, on the dashboard, when you go down to resources, way down here, there are video walkthroughs that I talk through of each of the forms that we have. So if you get into a situation with a seller where they happen to have a well, you're like, oh gosh, I don't think most even went over that form because it's so rare. You can scroll through here and you can find exactly how to talk through something unique and specific, or if there's something that you just in role playing have had a hard time with, how exactly do I explain that commission section, for example? You can go back in here and you can listen to them. We do put the boot camps on here, so you'll be able to re-listen to boot camps, but I don't encourage you to do that. That would be way too long and way too boring. So these forms breakouts are, they range from just like a minute, and some of them are up to about 10 minutes or so. So please do utilize that. When you are listing a house, I like to say that I feel listing houses is a lot easier than helping buyers because when you're out showing houses with someone, they all of a sudden out of the blue will probably surprise you and say like, this is the one, I want to make an offer on this one. And then there's a lot of pressure. It's very time sensitive. They're eager to do it, but you probably had other things on your calendar. And so you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to squeeze this in. And so you're kind of rushing, and there's a lot of pressure to get these forms right at the time that you're working with a buyer. But when you're working with a seller, I find them to be easier because you communicate with the seller, then you schedule the appointment with the seller. You usually have a day, maybe even a week, maybe even longer to be preparing all these forms before you actually get together with them face to face. And what most people will do when they list a house is they will go back into the last time that that house was listed. So for example, let's just go in. Perhaps you guys have done this already, but let's just go in here and let's see what's for sale right around us in Burnsville. And it looks like there's probably a condo or a townhome over here. Perfect. So let's just say that this person at South Cross Drive has contacted you and they say, I'm ready. I'm ready to make a move and I'd like to list my house. I'm interviewing you as a possible realtor. Will you come over and take a look? So you would search their address in the North Star MLS and you would look at the history and you'd look and see like, oh, okay, it looks like they bought it back in 2001. So they've owned it for quite a long time. You want to look at the tax information. You want to dig up as much as you possibly can on who the seller is and what you know about the house. But then something that's really nice is you can select that previous listing. You can go here into Minnesota Realtor Instinet Forms. It's a white box that kind of has a green starburst on it. And then it takes you automatically into this wizard. And it'll ask you if you wish to use a template. And we encourage you to use the KWPR listing paperwork template because that will include all the documents that are required for listing on North Star MLS, as well as documents that are important to us. But I'm going to skip that step and I'm just going to go right into my seller forms here. So before I get started, does anyone have anything that they're working on listing right now? Heidi, I feel like you had something that you were listing a month or two ago.
I did, yes. And just this week, actually, my buyer bought my seller's listing.
You're
So
kidding me.
no, I'm not. So yeah, that's all wrapped. Well, it's not wrapped up yet.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Oh, I'm so happy for you.
Yeah,
Good.
thank you.
And Tara, you are listing something?
Yes, I have a meeting on Sunday to do paperwork or start it
Tomorrow?
for my friend's dad. Yeah, I guess tomorrow. Yeah.
Great.
So my friend's dad is selling their house
Fantastic. And where is it?
in Grove.
Okay. What do you think it'll be priced at?
Aiming for about 345, just to kind of put it in like the right price point. I think that we can get at least 350, 355. So
Awesome.
we'll see.
Awesome. Good. Do you have anything?
Not at the moment,
No? Okay. All right. We'll make that your goal.
no. Yes.
Make it a 3 for
Yeah.
3 around here. Those listings are the best because when you have a listing, then you can do an open house, then you can do all that online marketing and get all those online leads. So listings are definitely what our business runs on.
I have a quick question
Yeah.
before we move on.
Yeah.
I saw on the listing, it said it was subject to statutory
Yeah.
recession. What does that mean?
Yeah, great question. All right, so statuses in the MLS, I'm gonna go back actually to where I did the search. Statuses in the MLS are really important. And the listings that you are, here we go.
Do you have the Wi-Fi password?
Not
I
off the
can
top
go
of my head, but yes, I'll bet they have it posted there, yeah. Listings are categorized as either coming soon, active, temporarily not available for showings, pending, closed, canceled, expired, or comparable sold. So when a listing is active, which is what you'll use most frequently when working with a buyer looking to see what's actually available for sale, you have to note, and this can be very confusing for consumers, you have to note that even if something is active, it may actually be sold, but in that sale agreement, there may be some contingencies. And when it is a part of an association, they have a state statute, so it's not a real estate law, it is a Minnesota state law that says they have 10 days to review those association documents. Because if they find something that they either can't live with, like perhaps there's a pet weight or quantity or breed restriction or something, maybe it restricts something about, parking in the driveway or a certain number of vehicles that you can have, something that they just for their lifestyle can't live with, they could review those association documents, cancel based on something they found in the documents, and then get their earnest money back and refund it. So it's a contingency that people will use to protect their rights to be able to use and enjoy the property the way that they expect it to. Another contingency that you'll see in here a lot is that it is active, but it is sold subject to home inspection. So most people will do a home inspection. Now, at that time, the seller may not be allowing any more showings. So you may, request a showing and they may deny it. Or from your seller's perspective, if they're willing to allow those showings still, it really is in their best interest because you could always take a backup offer, for example. So someone else could write an offer on the home. Your seller could even sign it, but within the offer, it would say that the full acceptance of this purchase agreement is contingent upon the cancellation of this previously written purchase agreement. Yeah. Were you able to get it?
Yes.
Good, perfect.
Thank you.
Of course, yeah, that actually is that's a really insightful question. I'm glad that you asked. If it is truly pending, it will no longer be in the active status, and it'll note that it's pending, and what that means is all the contingencies have been removed, but they're just waiting on financing, waiting for it
So
to
this
close.
means that they still didn't like accept the final offer?
It does mean that they accepted an offer, but the buyer that they accepted the offer from has the ability to change their mind and get their earnest money back, which allows other buyers the chance to also make an offer on it. Okay, good. All right, well, let's dig in. I know that you've all heard me before where I've talked about how there are a variety of different personality types, and I like to think of the 4 personality types as 4 animals. Someone is either a bull, an owl, a lamb, or a tiger, and the acronym is BOLT. It's just easier for me to remember than like the driver and the influencer and all those things. I feel like I'm a pretty good mix of all 4 of them, but today I'm going to be describing these forms as if I'm an owl. Now, you are not going to want to describe these forms as an owl to your seller tomorrow because they are going to say you are highly annoying and I'm exhausted and this is too much mumbo jumbo. But as a licensed and trained professional realtor, if they ask you questions about clauses, you have to be educated on them, you have to understand them, which is why I'm going to go over them in more detail today. But because you have all done these boot camps before and listed houses and helped buyers with houses, if there are things that you're like, okay, Melissa, you're beating a dead horse, please move on, I will gladly do that. So we'll be done by noon for sure, and ideally maybe even I'd get you out of here a little bit early. So I'm going to just start with agency relationships, and I am going to go over this really briefly unless one of you says, hey, would you actually cover that in a little bit more depth? But what's important about the agency relationships in real estate is it starts here with Minnesota law requires, and then it says this is a disclosure only, this is not a contract. So this is a form that I find is really, really easy to get signed. It's really helpful because depending on the personality type that you're working with, you can go over it in depth to build trust. You can go over it really briefly to just be quick and concise, but I like to flip to the backside and just say, I'm a licensed realtor, I hold my license with the state of Minnesota, the Department of Commerce regulates me, and the Department of Commerce wants to make sure that I have explained the fiduciary responsibilities that I owe you as a seller. I owe you loyalty, obedience, I must give you full disclosure, I must maintain everything that you tell me in full confidentiality, and I need to use reasonable care to be accessible and available to you as often as possible, and I must also be responsible for good accounting of any financial information that you share with me, and certainly any money that you might give to me if you gave me, for example, a check. Now, I'm representing you today as a seller, but I also represent a lot of buyers. Every now and then, perhaps we might run into a situation where myself or my brokerage is representing the buyer who's going to be making an offer on your house, which is called dual agency. And I also have a capacity where I can represent buyers and sellers who've already put themselves together, and I can just facilitate the transaction for them, meaning I just do the paperwork and help them set up the closing and such. So as this says to you, this is not a contract, this is merely education that the Department of Commerce wants to make sure that I've gone over with you. And they sign it, and then literally they sign it, and then literally like they got the pen in their hand and their wrist is all warmed up, so that's a really good thing when it comes to going on to the rest of the forms, because the rest of the forms get a little bit more in detail. I'm going to skip over this listing contract for now. I'm just going to go to the additional disclosures in the affiliated business because I'm going to go over those really briefly too, since I had previously gone over them in depth with you guys when we did the buyer boot camp. I also get excited about this form, kind of like the agency relationship form, which I love because it says it's not a contract and it's just good education. But this is also really good education. I take the opportunity to tell people at this time, I was licensed with a different real estate company for 20 years before coming to Keller Williams, and they didn't have a form like this. And this form is so full of valuable little tidbits. I say it's just kind of a potpourri of little bits of information that aren't in our state statute or our state required contracts. And these are just really good bits of information for you to have. So if it was someone who was a little bit more analytical, I would probably point out a couple things that I would want them to know. And if it is someone who isn't, I just jump right to this part here where I say, like, so for in your instance, for example, it is Keller Williams Preferred Realty's policy to let everyone else know if there are already offers on the table. If they ask me, I need to have your permission to tell you that indeed there are other offers. So I want to have you just initial here and check this box that says, I do permit my broker to divulge this information. And then most people will say, like, why would I not divulge that information? And I would say, I really don't know. But everyone negotiates a little bit differently. Everyone feels a little differently about privacy, and I do need to give you the choice. I typically do tell people, but if you wish for me not to, we would check this box here. That's also really helpful to talk through. This section is a must because you have to initial it, but it's also really helpful to talk through with buyers, because when buyers get into these multiple offer situations, it's really emotional, it's really overwhelming, and you might not get any information from the seller's realtor. And so this helps the buyer here understand, like, okay, I get it. It is the seller's choice, and they may be telling their realtor that they don't want them to sign that. So I'm just gonna have you go ahead and sign here, and then I write my name and the property down there, but honestly, you can leave that blank. This is not important from an auditing perspective to have a property address on if you are busy and you just don't have time. On this form, I tend to start out with, so when's the last time you bought a new car? And then people will be like, what on earth is she talking about? And it's just kind of helpful, I feel like, sometimes to get them out of the like monotony of talking about all these forms. And they'll say like, oh, I've never bought a new car. I would never do that. You know, I buy used cars or whatever. And if by chance they have bought a new car, they would say like, oh yeah, just last year I leased my car or whatever. And I would say, do you remember when you were signing all the paperwork, they probably said to you, hey, we need to let you know, not only do we own, you know, Twin Cities Ford, but we also own Ford Credit, we also own Ford Warranty, we also own all these other various Ford businesses. And so as a business operating in the United States of America, we need to disclose to consumers if we own businesses that are also affiliated. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to use these businesses, but if you choose to use these businesses, that, you know, these are kind of the rates and the estimates of what you might expect to pay for them. But we just are obligated to fully disclose to you that our businesses are affiliated with mortgage and title companies. There's some shared ownership here. Okay, yeah, no problem. We usually will sign that without any questions. All right, now this one gets a little trickier, so let's dive in. We have policies here at Keller Williams, but we also have regulations that we have to follow by the North Star MLS. So this is a really good resource to you. NorthstarMLS.com, when you go up here to the resources tab, there's a training library, which is really helpful, general information on the forms, and then there's also this rules and regulations tab. So when you go in here, you'll see, like, it's very easy if you follow these 4 simple rules. You must enter a listing within 2 business days of the contract effective date. You must also get your photo within 2 days of entering the listing. You must ensure that all these forms are, and pictures are free from any third-party promotion. So like, for example, in your pictures, you can't have your Keller Williams sign in it. You can't say in a photo caption like, you know, this seller is offering seller paid closing costs paid for by, you know, so such and such financing company. And then when it goes to the pending status, you are obligated to change that 2 business days. And also when it goes into the closed status, you're obligated to do that within 2 business days. So just remember the 2 things, but here's what's tricky about it. It says you have to enter this listing within 2 business days of the listing contract effective date. Well, there's a few different dates up here. So there's a date form up here on the top. There's also a contract start date right here. And there's a signature block at the very end where you put the date. What our front desk is looking for to help you maintain compliance with the North Star rules is that this date, and the signature date are all exactly the same. Now that can be a little bit tricky because you're going to meet with them on Sunday. There may be some forms even that you have them sign that are completely filled out. The listing input form is the one that comes to mind. But you have to, must upload it into Command and then notify the front desk that it's in Command so that they can enter it within those 2 business days. So it'll have to be entered by the end of the business day on Tuesday. What some people will do, and the reason I'm taking so much time to explain this to you, is they'll say, I'm having them sign this, but I don't actually want the contract to start until June 1st, for example. Well, you really can't be tricky in terms of how you sign all these things. What you need to do is you just need to sign it for that exact date, and then you also need to have them sign this certification to withhold form. So I'm gonna go over the withhold form and the coming soon form. Although I said I was diving right into the listing agreement, I've decided midstream that I'm gonna go over these 2 forms first. What withhold is used for is withhold says to the North Star MLS, okay, I'm compliant, here's all my paperwork, but they don't actually want their house to be available for people to see on the North Star MLS right away. Maybe they're not ready, maybe you haven't scheduled pictures yet, maybe they have some clean out that they wanna do, maybe their kids' last day of school is on Friday, like mine, and so they don't wanna have anyone coming through and showing their house. And those are all perfectly reasonable and understandable situations, but you absolutely must send to the North Star MLS, which means you have to put into Command one of these withhold forms. And it's really, it's a little bit scary, but it's very logical to the sellers. So you'll have the seller sign and date it, you'll also sign it, and then you'll just explain to them that you have to understand that the multiple listing service oversees a high volume of listings, and the North Star MLS regulates us. But if you are withholding your listing, meaning we have a listing contract, but it's not visible on the MLS yet, you have to understand it's keeping your property from being exposed. It eliminates my ability to advertise it. It does limit my ability to market to other agents, though you can, in a withheld status, market to other agents. There's a cool little worksheet here in the resources that you'll be able to dig up that shows you how what you can and can't do on a withheld listing and also on a coming soon listing. So basically what you're telling them is your property is not going to be visible yet to the public when it's within the withheld status, but we're gonna switch it over to active when you are ready. Now, that you all explained to the seller, but what I want to explain to you as a realtor, any chance you get to sign a listing agreement, do it. Because you may go, for example, on Sunday, and he may say, I really like you, I really like what you've just explained to me, but I'm just not, I'm a lamb, I'm not quite ready to make my decision yet. And it may be very, very tempting for you to say, okay, no problem, yep, no problem, I'll just take this paperwork and I'll send it to you for electronic signing whenever you are comfortable. Well, you know what can happen in that meantime, right? They go to work, they tell their friend, yeah, I'm super excited, I think I can get a lot of money for my house right now. And then that friend may say like, oh, my daughter just got her real estate license. Can she come over and do a little practice? Can she come over and interview you? And, you don't have to post with her, but just let her come over and kind of go through the process. Well, who knows? He may fall in love with the coworkers. He may really admire and want to help out this new young agent, and he may sign a listing agreement with her instead. Like, you thought you had the listing agreement in the bag, and he's just changed his mind for whatever reason. So signing a listing agreement, even if they're not ready to list, is the very best thing that you can do for your career. It's the very best thing you can do. But we have to acknowledge that not everyone is ready then to put their house on the MLS and show it and have pictures and whatnot. So that's why that withheld status is valuable. Yeah.
So when you meet, like for example, they're gonna meet sellers tomorrow, do you usually take like a paper copy or like your computer?
I would recommend it.
Okay, but like when they sign it, you give them like like you send them an email.
Yeah, I would just scan it as a PDF,
Okay.
email it to them. Or, you could go the extra mile too and make a photocopy and drop it off at their house or mail it or something, depending on their age and their personality type. Yeah. As I audit files, I see probably only about 25% of paperwork is signed in person.
Okay.
Most of it is done electronically. But if you can get them to sign it right there, it is the very best case.
Okay. You just like did like you said like did like photocopy.
Yeah, you could just bring it in here and use the scanner.
Right. Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you highlight these forms, like when you're like actually doing them, are you able to have highlighter on it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good idea. You can put X's where they sign, you can jot little notes, absolutely. In addition to withheld, another status that you see when you search houses, you know, on the MLS is the coming soon status. Now, coming soon is a relatively new option for our Association of Realtors here in Minnesota. But something that's very important to remember, the coming soon status can only last for 3 weeks maximum. I really, really like the coming soon status because what it does to me, in my brain at least, is this seller is telling you, oh my gosh, you know, I have so much work to do, I am not yet ready to list my house. But you're thinking, oh no, like if you don't have this house listed by June 1st, the market in Minnesota really changes. Minnesotans go to the cabin, they go to everyone's wedding, they have all these graduation parties, and sales really start to, when we have this curve, like sales really start to drop. And if there are, you know, if you wait too long to get this house on the market, there's gonna be buyers who bought something else or just have gone up north. And so the coming soon status is almost a way to tell the consumer, like, don't buy something else. This one is going to be coming on the market within 3 weeks. So the coming soon status, I think, is really, really good for that purpose. It also, I think, is really valuable for those sellers who say, I want to sell my house as quickly as possible. And so I want people to have seen it online. I want people to have researched the schools, you know, research what they need to do. I want them to be geared and ready to come into my house at that first open house or that first day it's available for showings and make me an offer. So it's just a good way of like preparing people. When you go immediately into the active status, which a lot of people do, but when you go immediately into the active status, those poor buyers, and really the poor buyers' agents aren't like us, are dropping everything and scrambling to get there in that day. So this is just a good way to be like organized, planful. I have heard from some consumers that it drives them a little bananas when they see these coming soon. So consumer feedback is that they wish that the coming soon status could be more just like 2 or 3 days rather than 3 full weeks. So use it how you wish. But if you are not ready to show the house, put the house as active on the MLS, use either the withheld status or the coming soon status.
It's just on the KW, is it on the transaction desk for like the few?
For sure, yeah, absolutely. Now, it may not be right in the template, in the wizard that we use, but it's just called coming soon listing authorization form. Okay, all right, now we're really gonna get into the meat and potatoes like I keep saying, but I promise you, we are doing it now. So I'm requesting of you that you have your date on the top right corner and your start date and your signature date all be the same. So Tara, for you, that'll be tomorrow, that'll be May 21st. So we'll just change all these in here. And then you put the property address in, you put the county that it's in, you put the legal description. And if you don't know the legal description, what legal descriptions are is they're a way of describing property at the county, and it originally starts with how it's being developed by the land developer. So like, for example, this one is probably lot 10, block 1 in the South Cross Village. It's a condominium with a unit number 2601, and then it sometimes will have an additional PID if there's a separate garage space or something of that sort. But you can get the legal description from previous listings. You can also get it from the tax information. It'll be listed down here as the legal description as well. Some of them are long, some of them are a little bit shorter and more basic, but it'll auto-populate if you're starting this based on a listing that was previously listed. You'll put in the seller's names here. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be their legal names. Like if you know him as Steve and his name is Steven, it can be as, you know, legal and legit as you wish. But this is just a document that we see in the North Star MLS sees, the title company never sees it, so it's not quite as important as the purchase agreement, where I've said in the past that we do need to have their correct spelling, full legal name, so that they can properly go into title as the correct name. The brokerage is the entity in which they are signing this contract with, and you're just signing it on behalf of Keller Williams Preferred Realty. There needs to be a start date and an end date to the contract. And most people do a listing contract for a full year. We encourage you do it for as long as you possibly can. But depending on the personality type of the seller, they may say like, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to be committed to you for that long. Like, what if you don't do a very good job for me? So a real analytical person, you may just want to prepare yourself and say, hey, let's just do a really short listing for now. Let's start it right now on May 21st. Let's end it on July 21st. And we can always extend that out further if your house isn't sold by the end of the summer. So just try to really speak to their personality there to build trust and to build connection.
You don't fill that out yourself, though, you wait for them, right, and then get their approval, that they're like, okay with that July.
Yeah, exactly. So like Tara, for you tomorrow, I recommend leaving these 2 dates blank because you want them to sign it tomorrow. But if they don't sign it for some reason, you don't have to redo all the paperwork. So I would just leave it blank and then just have discussion with them about what they're comfortable with. You also will want to have a discussion with them about price. So you may leave this spot blank too until they've decided right at that appointment. But what we encourage you not to do is write to be determined and then do a withheld agreement on it. It has been suggested to me that if ever you had to put these forms in front of a judge in a court of law, that they may find that your contract is not valid without the essential items of a contract, and one of the essential items is price. So if you're signing, let's just use another example. Let's say you're signing your grandma's house to be listed. But you know that grandma wants to live in her house all summer, she wants to enjoy it. She's not gonna list it until she leaves to go to, Florida in the fall. So you may write in there to be determined because I've got the signed listing agreement, but it's not gonna be on the MLS until the fall. And at that point, we have no idea what the price is gonna be. Prices change every day, all day, every month. And so it may be very tempting to say to be determined there because you don't want to offend grandma like, oh, I only think your house is worth $100,000. But you do, I think, in your best interest, want to have a price in there. And some realtors resist that, but the theory and the basis is that it could be found that your contract is not valid, and that would be a very bad thing if you wanted to be paid your commission in a situation where you had to meet some sort of lawsuit. You do also have to write in here the terms in which the seller will agree to sell their home, and that means the financial terms. So you write in here that they'll accept cash, I mean, who wouldn't? That they would accept conventional financing, VA financing. You'll want to leave off FHA financing if it's one of these types of listings where there's an association. The association has to be approved by FHA to offer FHA financing in condos and townhomes. And so you definitely do not want to put in FHA unless you know for sure from the seller and the seller's association if it's FHA approved. If it's in a rural area, you would be able to include USDA financing. And then something that's really unique and could actually really help your seller is if they would be willing to sell their house contract for deed. Now, grandma's the perfect example. Grandma might be like, oh, I'm just gonna put the money in my savings account. I have absolutely no need for it. Well, a real savvy investor might say, oh, wow, so I can sell my house, be done with it, but delay the full payment of my house and take little small payments. And that would be what a contract for deed is. They almost pay rent on it, which is then additional income to that seller. Most often you are not going to put contract for deed there. Most sellers are like, I don't know what that is. I don't want to mess with it. I want the money right now. But if you have the ability to write in contract for deed, it is a really unique situation. Any questions about financing?
For FHA, do you have to be confident that the home will qualify for FHA, or they kind of take their chances of writing an FHA offer? If we offer it, then an inspector comes out.
They take their chances.
Would you probably take it out if you know for certain, like obviously peeling paint on the exterior of the home or something like that?
That's such a good question and really a good thing to share with the others who are newer to the business. FHA financing has, like all financing, an appraisal. But FHA appraisers are a lot more diligent on behalf of the government to make sure that the house is incredibly safe and habitable for that consumer, and then also easy for the federal government to sell if the seller forecloses on the mortgage and the government has to take it back. So it is very common that in an FHA inspection, there may be more work items that are insisted by the mortgage company that the seller fix up before the buyer can close on it. It's a really good question. And you can just say like, no, we're not messing with FHA, we don't accept FHA financing. That's absolutely fine. It limits your pool of buyers a little bit, depending on the price range of the house, but you can absolutely just leave that off. So once you've gone over kind of the, the basics, the price and the start date and the address and whatnot, we go into a really large chunk where we are making sure that the sellers understand for the seller's privacy that part of listing a home means listing it on these IDX websites. So we list it on the North Star MLS, but then it gets syndicated to Zillow, to HotPads, to EdinaRealty.com, to Realtor.com, and that is almost out of our control. But the small way that we do have to control it is we can tell, and then legit, this is just something that they do at the North Star MLS, we can tell them, we don't want this listing to be displayed on the internet at all. Or maybe, okay, we're fine with it being on the internet, but we don't want the address to be shown. We don't want one of those Zillow's estimates to be shown. We don't want to allow anyone to be able to comment on it. Like a comment, for example, might be, someone sees this house on a posting that you put on Facebook or Nextdoor or something, and a comment might be, oh, I remember, back in the day, they sold drugs out of that house and there was a murder there, or, like people's speculation, people's opinion. Now, everyone is gonna say, I don't want this estimate, I don't want comments. However, if they wanna sell their house, they do essentially have to submit and say yes to all of these things. Or the Zillows of the world filter it out and say, then I'm just not bothering with it, I'm just not syndicating it to my website. Then you're not going to get maximum exposure, then you're not going to likely sell it for the highest price and the best terms. So they are kind of forced to check yes to all of these things, but you don't wanna automatically check yes in your paperwork. You wanna be sure to leave them blank. You wanna be sure to explain it to them, and explain it to them in the pace of their personality type. Like if you know this person's like, money, 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 I just wanna get as much money as and sell it for as quick as I can, then just say, so we're gonna syndicate this to a bunch of websites, but there are a couple things, that can be a little bit messy with those websites, like every now and then your Zillow's estimate's a little off, or someone may make some silly comment about your house, but in order to give your house maximum exposure, you have to understand and agree to all of these things. Are you cool with that? And most people will be like, yeah, absolutely, just get my house sold, expose it to as many people as possible. There's a small little section in here that you can just skip over if you're working with someone who's, you can tell they're feeling bored. And that is this property also going to be listed for lease? Now, honestly, I have never ever done this in a listing of mine where I've said yes, and it might be something, that you would do occasionally, but it is just so rare. I think you can automatically check that it is not going to be listed for lease, and that the seller may not list the property for lease. We have the ability on North Star MLS to search and list leases. There are very few on there, but if you wanted, you could list a house for sale or lease, for example, if someone was being transferred out of town.
So this would be the same form that you would use if you were listing a rental then?
There's a different form.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a different form, so you'd have to do both.
Okay.
And then it would have 2 mistakes online.
So then if you're only doing it for the sake of like actually renting the home via the North Star, then you technically wouldn't do this form, or would you still do this one?
No, there's a different one. You
Okay,
would not have to do
this is
one.
only if they're open to both selling and leasing.
Okay, great question, exactly. All right, then we go on to talk about some of the obligations that the seller is now going to have to Keller Williams Preferred Realty and to consumers who are going to be looking at their house. So when listing your house, you're asking me to market your home and do a good job of negotiating offers, presenting offers to you, taking this to final closing. But you have some obligations to us as well. You are obligated to make sure and give us access to the property when we need it for showings and inspections and walkthroughs and things like that. You are also not allowed to record on the property whatsoever. So I noticed when I came, you had a Ring doorbell, and most people watch pretty closely to see who's coming and going at their house. You can hide a nanny cam if you wish, but it is my responsibility to tell you that that would be illegal based on Minnesota state statute. I know people do it all the time. That's a little tip, a little pro tip when you're showing houses. Make sure and get in the habit of wearing a poker face when you're in there and telling your customers to wear a poker face, even at the front door when you're coming and going. You know, don't say like, oh, I'm so excited to see this one, or as you're walking out, like, oh, I love it so much, because very likely someone's listening to you. Save your emotion and save, you know, talking about the technical details for when you get out into the street, or even better, when you guys get into your car. But you do need to tell the sellers that by state law, they are not allowed to record on the property.
So if you had a like Ring doorbell on the house, if the Ring doorbell were to be like included in sale, is that something where you have to like deactivate it at the time while they're actually viewing the home,
That's a
or
good question.
how does that work?
Yeah, they probably should. They
Okay,
probably won't.
okay.
And we can't be responsible for that. We
Yeah.
just can only be responsible for telling them this is a state law.
Okay.
They
'Cause
also
only- 'cause
probably
I-
speed.
it's like
And that's the state
consensual.
law.
It's like the conversation between the two have to be at least one consensual, which they are not on site, so then that's where it becomes illegal.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. We also want to make sure that they understand we're going to be taking pictures. We're also likely going to be doing video walkthroughs and such of their home, and that they are now granting us permission to use this perpetually and worldwide, to use it in the future. So if it's a really beautiful house and a really beautiful backyard, and you put it in your marketing brochure, or Keller Williams puts it, you know, in some sort of marketing that we do for our business, this little paragraph right here is where the seller acknowledges that they've given us permission to do that.
Do buyers sign a similar agreement? So like, for instance, like I sold my last home, and the buyer to the home, because I personally represented my own self with selling my house, and the buyer to the home like requested that I take the photos off of the internet.
Yes.
So like, I guess I wonder if they also signed something similar to that, because they were trying to say, take that down, I don't want you to have pictures of my house. And I'm like, well, I paid money to have these marketing photos
Yeah.
of the house, it just happened to be mine.
Yeah, you didn't have to.
Okay.
We
I
don't have to. And I get that question probably once a quarter or so, where someone just for, you know, whatever strange experience they've had in the past has, you know, extreme privacy perspectives. And every now and then people will go, you know, the extra mile to make things difficult and complicated. It's hard to get it down from like the Zillows and the Realtors and Realtor.com, and it's really a profitless waste of your time. But this is only for sellers where the sellers acknowledge, you know, it now becomes property of Keller Williams. I always, even if it's someone who's bought and sold a bunch of houses, I always skip over this compensation section. Actually, I need to get on the forms committee and tell them that I want it to be moved to a different area, because I think talking about the commission is a little premature before I go on to tell them the other things that we're gonna do to help them sell their house. There's also a section in here about cooperating commission, and so I just skip over and I go down here and I start at line 156 and I say, I'll come back and we'll talk about commission here in just a couple minutes, but I'd like to go over the rest of the clauses with you before we talk about that. So you'll see here there's about 3 pages that I'm going to go over with you, but I want to start by talking about this. So one of the benefits of working with a licensed professional realtor is that we can help you coordinate all kinds of details in this very complex, messy process of selling your house. One of the things that we have to have your permission, however, because it's so closely related to your financing, is scheduling your closing. Either you wish to have me arrange for a qualified closing agent, or you'd prefer to schedule that on your own. The only time I ever have anyone check this 165 is if they say something like, oh my gosh, that's right, my Aunt Sally's a title closer, and she told me if I was ever gonna buy or sell a house that I had to close with her, so no, you don't need to do that for me, I'll just work directly with my friend, my aunt, my whomever. But most people say like, oh yeah, absolutely, that's kind of weird, like, yes, I want you to handle all these details, including the closing, so great. I will schedule the closing for you, I just need to have you initial right here. Speaking of closing is one of the additional costs that you're going to have as a seller. And I'm gonna bring out this net sheet here soon, but just, putting it in front of you right now, you'll notice that in addition to my real estate commission, there are additional costs that you are going to incur as a seller. One is paying a closing agent, one is paying, the photographer for pictures. There are a lot of little various additional closing costs that you're going to have to sell your house. I also need to ask of you, are you indeed a U.S., and I get this term mixed up a little bit here, are you indeed a U.S. Resident? And if you are not, if you are like a foreign corporation, if you are a foreign trust, if you are a non-resident alien, like the best real life scenario that I heard on this was many people from Canada have bought homes in Arizona. And so when you go to buy a home from Arizona, you may be buying it from a non-US resident. You may be buying it from a Canadian. Why this is important, and now I'm taking more detail than I would with most sellers because we know most people are US citizens and we would just very easily check yes. But where it's important to spend more time on this is with your buyers, because if a buyer buys a house from someone who is not a US citizen, and that seller doesn't pay the appropriate amount of taxes on their proceeds at the closing, physically at the closing, the buyer becomes responsible for it. And that would be a total nightmare if you bought a house from a Canadian who had $200,000 worth of equity, So we need to disclose as sellers, and you need to be asking them as a seller agent, are you indeed a US citizen? You have to put it on the disclosure. It also goes on the purchase agreement, which is why it's worth talking about a little bit. So the brief summary that I would say with someone when I'm talking through this at a more swift pace is I would say, hey, you're gonna see this a couple times. We are going to need to assure the buyers that you are indeed a US resident, and that is
We would do
impact.
is not, correct?
Well,
foreign
seller
person?
represents that the seller is not a foreign individual. Yeah, yep, exactly. Got it. All right, there is a possibility that I may represent the buyer who comes in and makes an offer on your house, but there's a larger possibility that my brokerage, Keller Williams, may have a realtor who's representing the buyer. And that enters us into what's called a dual agency relationship, where the brokerage, maybe not the individual realtors, but the brokerage has more knowledge and more access to information than the agents who are at two different brokerages. So I need to disclose that to you, and I actually need to get your permission. I need to ask, will you agree to dual agency representation, and will you consider offers that are also made by Keller Williams Preferred Realty? I have had one seller tell me no, that they do not want any dual agency situations and offers and showings on their house. And so I only checked that once in my entire 23-year career. So most of the time you will check box 197 that says, yes, we do indeed allow dual agency.
What would a dual agent have knowledge of that someone else?
Well,
out of the
let's
agency?
just say you decide to do an open house on this listing that you're doing. So you list it on Monday, you do an open house on Saturday, and in walks, some great prospective buyer. And they just were out garage sailing and noticed the open house signs, and gosh, I hadn't really been thinking about looking at houses. And I don't have a realtor, but I've absolutely loved my time here at the open house with you. I think you're amazing, and it just seems really efficient to me. So will you write up this offer for me? Well, all the knowledge that you have is why he's moving, what his mortgage balance is.
So it's those unasked questions essentially that I haven't disclosed to other parties.
You cannot disclose any of that. Okay. Yeah, you cannot disclose any of that. And working at Keller Williams, we have values, we have ethics, we have integrity, no guarantee. And not all brokerages have the same. Not all the brokerages brokerages trade in that way. And so if you get into a situation as a consumer with a dual agent who is highly unethical and, you know, really messy, they may say like, yeah, I gotta tell you, this guy, he's just diagnosed with cancer. Like, he needs to sell this house and he doesn't really care what he sells it for, he just wants to get rid of it. Well, then you're not protecting the best interest of your seller. If you were talking that way, you're not protecting the best interest of your seller. You're just trying to make a sale and trying to connect these two people together. Make sense? All right.
Melissa, question for you.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you spoke up.
Is it still dual agency if you're working with like a Keller Williams Realty Integrity or Keller Williams North, whatever it's
Oh,
called?
that is an excellent question. It's different with Edina Realty. Edina Realty owns and operates every Edina Realty location around the state of Minnesota and Wisconsin. You'll see like Remax Advantage Plus has, 12 different offices or whatever. So they would have dual agency in their brokerage, but our Keller Williams, every office is independently owned and operated. So the dual agency only exists if the offer comes from a Keller Williams Preferred Realty. It does not exist if it comes from Keller Williams Integrity Links.
Okay, thank you.
That's such a good question. I'm gonna leave that in future. That's really valuable clarification. All right, page 6 is just a bunch of little clauses. It's kind of like that Keller Williams additional disclosure. It's just kind of a potpourri of little miscellaneous things. So there's not really a good rhyme or reason. If you're working with someone very analytical, you can talk through every section. If you're working with someone who at this point is saying like, oh my gosh, you are wearing me out, this is so super duper boring, just pick a couple clauses that you're very comfortable in explaining, or you could even, just scan through and point out a couple of things. But it is my request of you as your broker that you understand all these clauses, and it's easy enough to understand them by just reading them. So go ahead and read through it a couple times and just study them for yourselves. But what I typically say is, there's a bunch of additional clauses and information here that we want to make sure that you understand when selling your house with Keller Williams. There are deadlines and points of clarification in here that talk about fair housing, that talk about previous agency relationships that we may have had on this property with other buyers. It goes on to explain that this entire agreement is going to be in writing and it's not considered an executed agreement until it's signed by both parties and copies are delivered to both parties. But anytime we ask you to sign something electronic, those signatures are considered valid as well. Before I have you sign here, if there are any other terms that you wish for me to include in this listing, I'm happy to put it here in this section. I have this in here now, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but normally it would be blank. And something that would be common to put it there as an additional item is you would say something along the lines of, should my nephew Johnny agree to buy this house, I can do so without working with Keller Williams Preferred Realty and wouldn't have to pay them the commission. Or should this turn into a dual agency relationship, the commission of 6% reduces down to 5%, or just little, kind of unique odds and ends, something personal that is important to the seller, that the seller wants to have in there. Otherwise, I just ask if there's anything unique or that we've previously discussed. But otherwise, I really don't even pull out this page. I just go back and I say, okay, so before I have you sign this, we definitely need to talk about commission. And since I've been over here before, and when I did the tour of your house and the interview with you, we talked about how my commission rate is 7%, and in my marketing agreement, this is what I offer you for the 7%. Did you have any questions about that? Usually they'll say no, but if you haven't had a prior appointment with them, if this is your first swing at that, you're going to want to talk a little bit more in detail about it, and they're probably going to have some questions about it. So I address that, I touch on it, and then I say, and just a reminder, because we've looked at it here in the net sheet, just a reminder, the full commission is going to be paid at closing to Keller Williams Preferred Realty, and then Keller Williams Preferred Realty agrees to pay the realtor who represents the buyer. The industry standard that we pay out to cooperating real estate brokerages, the buyer's broker, is 2.7%. And that is whether the broker is representing the buyer and also if the broker is assisting the buyer. So we always want, just for your information, not that you would tell this to the seller because they wouldn't care or want to take the time to go over it, but we typically want a buyer to be represented with a true buyer rep contract to assure that we're being paid for our work. But some buyers may say, I don't actually want your representation, I just want your assistance. I just want you to write the paperwork for me. And you can do that. You can assist a buyer by filling, all the contracts and whatnot for them and not have a buyer representation.
Would that be the facilitator?
No, that's even a little bit different. It's very similar, but like no one ever does this, but you can just assist a buyer. I recommend always representing them, but that's a clarification between the representation and assisting. Okay, so as we've talked about, we are going to pay 2.7% to the buyer's real estate company representative. And then naturally, we would like to be making that ourselves as well on the sale of your property. So in total, 2.7 to them, 2.7 to me means 5.4%. But I do have a lot of additional expenses that a buyer agent doesn't. And so to cover all those expenses, I am charging you a little bit more, which is the 7%, or some people will say 6%. Just so you all know, on our dashboard, all of our policies are listed on there, and we do have a actual policy that states we don't allow you to list a house for less than 5%. So use that, if nothing else, as a total crutch when negotiating what the commission rate is going to be, to say like, I'm sorry, my real estate company is highly professional, we do a lot of marketing, we offer a lot of services to you, and they simply won't allow me to list this for less than 5%. You'll get people who are, negotiators who are gonna say to you like, oh, well, I just had RE/MAX in here and they agreed to sell it for 4%. But I usually take the chance right here and become a little playful and a little more relational. And I say, my commission rate is 6%. That's usually what I list houses for. If you can list them for 7%, that would be even better and awesome. But I usually say, this is your chance to give me a test at how good my negotiating skills are. So I'm letting you know right now that the listing commission that I'm expecting, that I typically get on all of my listings, is 6%. But if you feel a different amount is fair, you can propose that to me right now and we can negotiate it and work it out. And usually, especially husbands and wives, the wife will be like, honey, don't even go there. Like 6 is fair. We've prepared for this. We knew this from the first time you came over and gave us your marketing. We've researched, we've compared. 6% seems very fair to me. There also is, in a different version that you guys will have in the templates, there's also going to be a blanket here that says, that talks about the BAC, the Brokerage Administrative Commission. If for whatever reason you don't put it in there, you forget to put it in here, you can put it in here as, you can put it in here in writing. But we do have a one-time flat fee that all of our buyers and all of our sellers pay at closing. It's just customary, every real estate company does it. And it is the term for it, some people call it the broker admin fee. That's kind of like old language, that's like calling it the master bedroom. It has to be called the Brokerage Administrative Commission, and we like to call it the BAC. It just rolls off your tongue a lot easier. So now that we have tackled talking about the commission, I also need to tell you that if for some reason I'm not able to sell your house in the time frame that you've given me on the first page about the contract start date and the contract end date, we certainly can cancel this listing agreement, or that listing agreement may expire. But my brokerage, now blame this on the brokerage, my brokerage requires that they have this holdover clause in here that states, if anyone we showed your house to or gave exposure to your house on comes back and makes an offer after the listing has expired or canceled, that we have a protective list that we will be responsible for providing you. I'll just email it over to you within 72 hours after the cancellation or the expiration of this contract. And then you would still be obligated to pay commission should any of those buyers end up buying the house from you. It can be a little tricky to talk through this. This is one that I would encourage you, rehearse with your mom, rehearse with your fellow, agents in the PC program and whatnot. It just never happens. So never say never. It so rarely happens that it's hard to talk about these things proactively, especially when you're basically talking about a breakup. Like if we break up our agreement, I still get money for the people that I showed it to. It's just a little tricky and a little weird. So, know your audience, gauge the crowd, decide how in detail you want to be about it. But just so that you understand, this cannot exceed 6 months after the contract. And most people will put in here, like 30 or 90 days. They'll say, I want to be really reasonable with you. After a month, after your listing has expired, if someone comes back from my listing, then commission would be obligated to be paid to Keller Williams Preferred Realty. But if it's anything beyond that, we understand, just times change. So you can go short, you can go up to 180 days, whatever you choose is totally okay by me. But this is a way of protecting yourself and your hard
Melissa, I have a question. In regards to that, say you had the house expired and or canceled, I suppose, and then you provide them with this list, and then like a month later, your buyer or somebody who was on that list comes when with different representation, because that name is still on that list, do you still get a part of that commission?
work. Yeah, you do. Now, unfortunately, it's a lawsuit. It's not like, the money just winds up in your bank account or Keller Williams bank account. Lawyers get involved, nasty notices and letters get sent out. But if, we had a situation in here recently where it was a commercial listing and it was $200,000 worth of commission. And they were fighting over this. They were totally signed up with new realtors, and the old realtor came back and said that I was the one who originally exposed them to this commercial listing. There's definitely times and places that this will come into play, but it's just very, very rare. Make sense?
Yep,
All right.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, we are gonna take a quick break. I need to check my phone. I've been playing phone tag with an agent from the office here, so I'm gonna check my phone. I might actually get a little coffee. Feel free to use the ladies' room, do what you need. Let's reconvene at 11:15. And then the rest of the forms, I'm gonna go over pretty briefly because you can listen to those recordings, but I just want you to understand when representing a seller, what additional forms you need to make sure and have them sign in order for it to be like a full and effective listing. So, see you back here in a couple minutes. Mhm. Right, right. Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good question, and will just be really good for me to know, so. Okay. Okay, all right, sorry guys, that took a lot longer than I had expected. Okay, Heidi, I am back, and I'm gonna go right into, it's so interesting, the call that I just had was about a seller's property disclosure. So we are gonna go into that next. I'll come back to the listing input form, and we'll do that one the very last, because it is legit my very least favorite thing too. A seller's property disclosure is basically a summary of information that the seller knows about their house that they are required to then disclose to a potential buyer. You cannot fill this out for them. So what I tend to do is I print just a blank copy of it. I let them fill in their address and everything. And I say, this is something that you're really gonna wanna put some time into. Whether you list with me or list with someone else, you're gonna have to fill this form out at some point, so I bring it to every listing appointment. And there's gonna be things on here that you're like, oh gosh, no, I need to do some research on that, or I don't really remember, or I'm not quite sure. And then one day you're gonna wake up at 2 in the morning and you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot to put on my disclosure that yes, we did actually have hail damage. It was back in 2003, it was so long ago, I almost completely forgot about it. But this is a very, very important document that sellers need to take very, very seriously. Now, you as the realtor are also obligated to disclose things, but you don't have a form to disclose them on. So what most realtors will use to properly disclose information that they know is they'll put it in here in the agent remarks, or maybe it's something that automatically gets sent in, like in showing time. When a showing is confirmed, maybe it's a note that you're giving them. But if you know something about the property and it's not also been disclosed in here, you are obligated to say that. So for example, if you knew that, because you live next door, you're listing your neighbor's house, if you knew that every May, all the basements flood in these houses that were built in, the 1950s, for example, and the seller has not disclosed it, if they're playing dumb, they're avoidant, whatever the reason may be, you do have to disclose. And it's a little tricky since there isn't a form for it.
Do you have to have it in a form of writing then, either in that agent remarks or
Yes.
via the showing time?
Yep, you're gonna wanna have proof that it's been in writing, not just verbalized to them.
And do we verbalize it to the seller that, hey, I know that your basement's floods, you're not including it on here, but I have to disclose that? Okay, would we encourage them to then write it on the disclosure?
And then that covers the basis. Exactly. Now, any seller, it is commonly misperceived that this is something that only certain types of sellers can do, out-of-state sellers or the heirs of the person who passed away or whatever. But any seller can choose to do a seller's disclosure alternative. This would be the type of case, if the seller says like, oh gosh, there's so many little quirky things about my house, like I can't possibly fill them all out on that disclosure. Can I just use that waiver form? And they could waive their right to disclose any information. That means the buyer is coming in recognizing like, buyer beware, the seller is just telling me they're telling nothing about the property. So they would use this seller's disclosure alternative. They can either hire a home inspector and provide the home inspection report to everyone who's looking at buying the house, or they can just do what I previously described, which is called the waiver. The buyer has to agree to that, and they do that by signing acknowledgement of it here. But there are a couple of things that a seller, regardless of their situation, does have to disclose, and that is if there is a septic system, if there is a well, if they are not a foreign individual, if they know if any methamphetamine has been produced in the house, and if they've ever tested for or mitigated for radon. So those are items that they cannot waive their right to disclose. It's state statute that they absolutely must disclose those handful of things. Not really sure how those handful of things were chosen, but they have to disclose that. It then goes on to talk about, carbon monoxide detectors, airport noise, mold, talks about a variety of things, the predatory offender information that we've talked about in the past. But the seller does have to sign this, and then you must, well, I shouldn't say must, a disclosure has to be accessible to all potential buyers, and the way most realtors do it is they upload the disclosure in the supplements here. And I access that by looking at those little papers that look like they're stacked up. Any questions?
When you go back to page 1, of like the disclosure itself without an alternative, the type of like title that you have, if they don't know off the top of their head, what's the best way to locate what kind of title they have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For the other two who haven't done as much real estate, the very basic questions that it asks up here, it starts with really basic stuff, like when did you build or acquire the house? Then it asks about your title evidence. It asks, have you occupied this home continuously? Is it suitable for year-round use? Are you in possession of prior seller's disclosures, and is there a manufactured home on it? So question number 2 that people tend to get really hung up on is there an abstract, or is it Torrens property? And this goes back to your real estate classes, so it's more fresh with you guys than us probably. You are perfectly capable of checking unknown, and I have most sellers just do that because this is something that the title companies are going to dig up for them, and so it's really not super important in terms of like, is this gonna prevent a buyer from buying it? So let them know that they can just check unknown. If they have an abstract, they probably have it in their safe, maybe they have it in a safety deposit box, and it's like a stapled packet of papers. So they would likely know if they had an abstract. So it is most often going to be registered or Torrens property. This is what you'll see, I'll bet 90% of the time. And then, like I said, it's perfectly okay for them to check. And you can explain that to them as you go through. One thing that I do also like to explain to people as we go through here is I like to go back to page number 4 and just call to their attention that you can get your brain kind of like playing mind games on you when doing this form, because you ask yourself, okay, is my air conditioning working? Yes. Is my air exchanger system working? No, I don't even think I have an air exchanger. No, it's no. When really the proper answer is not applicable, because I don't have an air exchange system. So what I usually recommend to people is go through here and say, okay, I have one, skipping it. I have one, skipping it. I have one, skipping it. No, we don't have any ceiling fans. So check the boxes for any items that you know for sure that you don't have. I don't have a solar collector. I don't have a trash compactor. So just get those out of the way. Then go back to these and say either these are in working order or not. It's also really important when representing your sellers, and certainly, of course, when representing a buyer in purchasing a home, that you read through this disclosure. Don't let them just fill it out and then upload it. You gotta read through it. And if your buyer's making an offer on a house, read through it before they make an offer. Because if there are things in here that are disclosed, you need to know that. So if they've had previous mice, you need to know that so that you can address questions that other agents may have or that buyers may have at open houses. One of my most embarrassing real estate experiences was one of my college besties just recently moved back to town. She lived all over the US. She moved back, she buys a house in Apple Valley. I don't read through the disclosure, at least not real super thoroughly. I scanned it, full transparency. And we get to the home inspection. And it's one of those kind of wintry days where there's a little bit of snow on the roof, and the home inspector says, because of the conditions, I'm not gonna go on the roof, but I'm just standing here looking at it, and I'm not quite sure I can put the exact date on the roof. I think it looks maybe like it's 3 years old or so. And I was like, oh, okay, oh, interesting. And the buyer himself says, well, in the seller's disclosure, it says that they replaced it last spring because of hail damage. And I was like, oh my gosh, I should have spoke up and said that. You know, I should have been the one who had that knowledge and had it like fresh and in my mind. It shouldn't have had to been my buyer who corrected, you know, the home inspector and basically also corrected me. So just an example, we're all human, we can't remember everything, but read through that seller's disclosure when listing a house and definitely when helping someone buy it. If a house was built prior to 1978, paint was produced differently in those years, and lead was used in paint prior to 1978. So you should always bring along a lead-based paint disclosure on a listing when you know that the year of the house and when you know that it's older. And what the seller is likely going to say is that they have no knowledge, records, or report of any lead-based paint. They may also have to say like, oh yeah, actually, I used an FHA mortgage and they required us completely refinish all the windows. If they have knowledge, they do have to disclose it here, but most are gonna say no. The rest of it you leave blank because like the seller's disclosure, you sign it, the seller signs it. This one you actually have to sign as the real estate licensee as well. And then when an offer comes into you, the buyer will select what they wanna do, knowing that it's an older house. They may want to conduct a risk assessment on that paint, or they may more likely, these most often come through as having waived it. But what you want to be looking for when presenting offers to your seller is what did the buyer select here? So again, don't rush through this, read this when the offer comes in.
So that risk assessment would have basically put you into contingency then?
Right, yep, exactly. Yep, that would be a contingency, exactly. You got it. Oh, I skipped over something that this is really important. So you've listed the house, you've shown the house, you received multiple offers on the house. Now this person who's buying the house has conducted a home inspection and they have found like, oh, fancy that, the humidifier on the furnace doesn't work at all. And you're like, oh, well, I saw there was a humidifier. It was kind of out of season, so I didn't notice or ask if the humidifier was running. Now we know. So the seller says, oh yeah, that's right. We just got out of the habit of using it, so we shut it off. We've never used it. It is incredibly important when you discover all these things at the point of home inspection to amend your disclosure statements. Very few people do it, and it is really, really, really important for the long term of what the future of, you know, this house is. You won't want to get into a situation where someone brings up an arbitration or a lawsuit or something and they say like, well, nowhere in here did it disclose that the seller a week before closing replaced the humidifier. So get in the habit of using this form. It's just a simple one-page form. You can type in however you want, and it's called the amendment to the seller's disclosure. All right. Going on then, if there happens to be a well or a septic system at the property, they're going to have to fill out 2 forms at a minimum and 3 if there are both a well and a septic system. But one thing that you have to for surely have them fill out is this location map. It's also just a 1-page sheet. It just gives you a little box in here where you can literally stick draw it. So you'll just write a line and you'll say this is the road, then you'll write a line and you'll say this is the driveway. Then you'll say, you know, the house sits up here, the pole barn sits over here, and this is where the well is. So this is a location map, and you'll say, you know, whether it's just for the septic, maybe it's for the well and the septic system, and then methamphetamine. I've never come across that. I've never had anyone disclose that they knew of that, but.
So it's only one time that I've actually seen one like listed. It was a house in Burnsville like a year ago.
Wow.
But other than that, I've never seen that. Because then I was looking, I'm like, this is abnormally low. And then I was like, we can build that, we cooked meth here, so we don't want that one.
Wow, yeah, I've never seen it. That's really impressive and interesting that your house has of that, that's for sure.
Melissa,
Yes.
real quick. So my seller just recently, like yesterday, replaced their water heater. So where do I find that amendment for that you were talking about?
Oh, I'm so glad you're asking. You need to do this right now. So when you go into forms, you should just be able to use this search bar and just type in, it is MNAR dash, but I think you can find it without searching in those letters first. But you'll just want to search up this amendment to disclosure statement. Having any luck?
Nope.
If you type in amendment, I'll bet you'll get a whole bunch of things. And then just scan through to find the disclosure statement.
Am I spelling amendment wrong? What's going on? Okay, I'll look for it.
You'll find it in there. What I was just clicking over to, one thing that I find, I'm gonna take the time to help you with this, because one thing that I find, add a form, I'm gonna search it. One thing that I find
Is
is,
she in the MNAR forms file or what file?
Oh, I found it.
okay, good. I was just gonna say, there are these different files. So sometimes, you know, if you're Keller Williams forms, for example, you might not find it. I think this is in the MNAR 2002 forms. You found it though, good, very good.
Yep, I found it. And I want to create a new form and add it to an existing transaction. Is that correct?
Yep. So then
Okay, thank you.
add it in, you're welcome. Yes, you're very welcome. Okay, all right, so going down to that well and septic system, I'm gonna be brief on them, but it's important that if your seller has a septic system, that they are compliant with the county, and they need to have that inspected, I think it's like every 3 years. So the well and septic forms are really in detail, they're very in-depth, they're gonna be very annoying for the seller to fill out, you'll probably wanna help them with it, but they do indeed need to provide all this information. Now, you can stand behind a seller who puts out disclosure forms that have hardly anything filled in, that's fine, it's just not very professional. So do what you can to help them fill them out as thoroughly as possible. So that is for the septic system. Here's a well disclosure statement. Now they don't, if they have well water, they don't have to be compliant with it per se, but a buyer will very likely ask them to conduct a water test, and they just take a sample and they drop it off at the county office, and the county will test it for them for a small fee. But again, this well information is pretty in detail as well, like what year was it built, how deep is it, what's its well number. It's gonna take some research when you have properties that are on well and septic. Okay, I'm gonna just go, this feels a little out of order, but I'm gonna go into the seller's net sheet. We have a good recording on the dashboard of a very experienced agent here in our office whose name is Scotty. And she goes through all of these lines and what to fill out in here. But what's important for me to share with you at this time, and we're not gonna go through it or it would take another half hour. What's important for me as your broker to help you do your job as thoroughly and as professionally as possible is we are obligated and responsible for fully disclosing to both buyers and also sellers how we get paid and where all the money goes, essentially. And so helping them understand that they will have a proration of their property taxes that are going to be showing up in their closing settlement statement as one of those additional fees that we talked about. Helping them understand that there is going to be a closing fee that they do have to pay the title company for doing that. They are likely going to charge them a doc prep fee. So it is a little pet peeve of mine professionally to see these net sheets that are, you know, like, I'm selling your house for $100,000 and my commission is 6%, and I don't show you any of these other expenses. It's just very misleading. It's very, I don't, you know, return it from an auditing perspective, but filling this out in detail and as thoroughly as possible is a really good idea. Bring that with you right away when you go to an initial listing agreement, because you will be referencing it like you heard me talk about a couple times during the listing contract.
Because, so like if you go meet with the seller, you don't have that sales price yet. So do you just fill that out like when you guys agree?
Yeah.
On the price, okay.
Yeah, exactly. But you can fill out a lot of things on the net sheet right away because a lot of those are standard fees. You know, our $4.99 BAC, a $500 closing fee, a lot of those are very standard. So use the recording on the dashboard if you need a brush up on how to fill that out. Okay, There is a possibility that someone may not sign a listing agreement with you, but rather, you may say, you know, I just wanna bring this one buyer in to a non-listed house. Would you as the seller agree to pay me commission if I'm representing a buyer and I put you two together? So you'll see this here is called the showing and compensation agreement. It used to be called the one-time showing agreement, which I think was a lot more clear. But you'll see as I'm scanning through that it is essentially a listing agreement. It has all the same blocks, it has all the same terms. But what's different is it says up here at the top that this isn't necessarily from a start and an end date. This is specifically to show just this one person or list of people if you're planning to show it to a few of them. Okay, again, kind of weird flow, a little bit out of randomly and out of order. A listing change form is something that our brokerage does not require at every status change, except for if the contract is going to be canceled. So if for some reason you can't sell a house, the seller decides they want to take their house off the market or just wants to not be listed with you, you would cancel it by using this status change check here. The seller needs to sign it and I need to sign it. So you would send it to me for electronic signature. Now, this would also be the case, like if you and the seller just agree, you know, we're just gonna cancel this listing for a couple weeks and then I'm gonna relist it. So you may use it more likely for that type of instance rather than just canceling a listing. But I would like to see you get in the habit of using this for everything. If you're gonna change the price of the house, if you're gonna do like a price reduction, you'll want to have the seller sign that. If you're changing it to pending, or maybe you're changing it to temporarily not available for showings, if it's like at my house, for example, the end of the school year, the kids are home, there's parties and it's crazy. The front desk, when you change status, does need this information, and so it's a good idea to fill out this form at every status change of your listing. Though we may not require the form, it's a really good idea to do it. It also serves as your true technical listing amendment, amendment as it's stated up here. And so sometimes people say to me like, well, you know, I need to change something in this listing. What form should I use? If it's as simple as price, you should just sign the listing change form and that amends your contract to a new price. But if there's something else that you want to change to the listing, if there's something else, you know, maybe you're reducing the commission, or maybe, Heidi, did you and I talk about that this week, actually? I'm having a flashback.
Yes, we did.
Yes,
Yeah, we talked about changing the price.
yeah, exactly. And so, you know, maybe there's something like, you know, they want to lengthen, that's not a good example. Maybe there's something where they want to exclude someone from being, you know, paid commission or showing the house. I'm rambling now, but the amendment to the listing contract is also an underutilized form that has a good use for it if you just need to change or tweak one little thing on the listing. I think she was thinking of changing the co-op commission, or I thought she was intending to change the co-op commission from 2.7 down to like 2.3, and you can do that. All right, now let's go to this one. This one's pretty important. Change the order on these. This one's pretty important to me. If you have a house that is a part of a association, if you have like this townhouse, for example, that we've been referencing, if you have this and it's a part of an association, your offer will come over on it that will describe the 10-day state statute, state law, statutory right of rescission. And what this means is from the date that the association documents are provided, even if that's, you know, 20 days into when you have an executed contract, the buyer has a full 10 days to review those association documents. They have the full right to be able to cancel based on what they learned in those association documents, and they have the full right to get their earnest money back 100%. So if you're listing something that has an association, be prepared to see that form. Then what you'll do is you'll want to make sure and fill out this form when you provide those association documents to the buyer's realtor. You'll want to say, hey, I'm sending you over these documents. You will have to sign the resale disclosure form from the association, which is a part of this. So I'm checking here that you'll get the resale disclosure statement. And I'm also sending you, there's articles of incorporations, there's bylaws, there's rules, there's regulations. The reason this form is so important, in my opinion, is what you don't ever want to be accused of is not sharing all the pertinent information. And if it ever came back, it would be a huge embarrassment that you didn't provide the buyer all the data and information, and then they need to resell it because they can't live there, if their truck can't be parked in the driveway for work, or if their dog can't, go outside and play, and they've had this beloved dog for 10 years. So go the extra mile, fill out this receipt when you provide them that, and then ask them to sign it. Either they, as the realtor, can sign it themselves, or they can send it on, which they will likely do, to their buyer to have them sign it. They also could choose to shorten that 10-day review of the association documents. So if you already have the association documents, maybe the buyer lives in the townhome complex or the condo complex, and they're just buying more for an investment. They already understand the rules. They know the drill. They could choose to shorten that, and you can shorten it to a minimum of 3 days, but you can't eliminate it altogether. You can shorten it to 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. You can waive the rest of the 10 days if you wish, but they have to have reviewed it for at least 3 days. And you'll see here that this is called then a modification or waiver of the buyer's right of rescission. These two forms regarding CICs are really long. They're really detailed. It's kind of confusing to me why it's so important, but it must be important because they put a lot of words on those pages. Okay, so we have gotten to the bottom of all the forms that may come up with a listing, with the exception of the listing input form. So I'm going to go back to that one, and I'm just going to forewarn you, and some of you know already, this listing input form it's going to be a pain in your side. It is truly so detailed. It is so much information. I feel kind of the same way about the showing instruction form. And I'll touch on that one last, but the single family residential listing input form is multiple pages of all these boxes and all of this information that you as the realtor are responsible for providing to our front desk, so the front desk can provide it to the North Star MLS. You'll notice that the black boxes are required, that the black ovals are only required if it's a comp sold listing, and the white boxes are not required at all. So looking at the white boxes, for example, there's things like, is this a new construction home? And if so, do you want to share the builder's name? Do you want to share the builder's model location and what the model hours are? So when you get to these white boxes, give yourself a high five and say like, whew, I don't have to fill that out. Once you've filled out all the black boxes, then I do encourage you to go back and look again at those white boxes and see, well, in the best interest of my seller, to be as thorough as possible, should I provide, a little bit more information? Like, for example, some of the things that are not required are down here when we talk about what types of appliances are there at the house. Are there amenities in this condo building? Like, does it have a deck? Does it have ceiling fans? Does it have hardwood floors? It is really good for you to fill those white boxes out as well. They're just not required. Oops, I need to click out of it.
Do you fill this out or do the sellers?
You fill it out. Yeah, I would not give it to a seller. It would feel really, really overwhelming to them. What I do want you to make sure and go over with the seller though is this disclosure on the first page. So you'll write in what the listing contract start and end date is. You'll have the seller sign it, and then you also sign it. And there are 12 little tidbits of information that you want to share with them. Again, based on the personality type of the person that you're working with. You can go over all of them, or you can just summarize really quickly. But basically, it makes sure that they understand that we as the broker are required to promptly provide the MLS about, the status and the type of house that it is, that all data that we submit to them then becomes property to them, and that the seller has authorized us as the brokerage to put this on the MLS and to share all that information with them. So cover those 12 boxes at the, pace in which you think is reasonable for that buyer, or I'm sorry, that seller, but then you do have them sign the first page. And I will admit, I even have them sign it if I have filled out nothing in the seller input form and I just intend to go back to my office and do that day. I just make sure that they recognize what I'm having you sign is blank. It is going to then be my job to go back and fill in all these forms, or all these fields. Similarly, with lots of little odds and ends fields, is this showing instruction form. The front desk is going to ask you to provide that to them because they want to make it convenient to you, and they want to be able to go into showing time and fill all that out for you. But you have the ability to do it as well by going here into showing time. You can go into the listing, you can edit the showing instructions on it on your own. You can edit the feedback form that you use. So if you're going to do that on your own, just make sure and put a note in command and let the front desk know, I'm not providing the showing instruction forms because I intend to do that on my own. Just make sure and not forget. The front desk tends to be, their personality types are very much, checking the boxes, making sure everything is done compliantly and perfectly and orderly. And when things are missing, they really stay on top of it. Whew, that covers it. So, any follow-up questions? Any parting statements, advice, Tara, even that you want to share with the two newer agents?
I guess, so both agents are new then?
Yeah, yep. Heidi on the phone and.
I guess I would just say like more or less like, the different routes of like how you help people find their homes. Like, I don't know if are you familiar with HomeSpotter, like the app?
Yes, I have it.
Okay, so like always making sure that if like someone's looking, and even if they like haven't, I guess, even if they haven't really, signed anything with you yet, or they're just, a lot of people kind of dabble into it. I like to share that app with them because other than that, a lot of people will send me like Zillow listings and like, oh, they actually accepted an offer last week or something like that. Just most accurate information to have. And then other than that, I would say just kind of coming familiar with setting up searches for people and how to get those sent over to them. I know you mentioned about like having the forms printed out. Like, you can always do the printout. It's nice to kind of have everything physically there and be able to just kind of pull through. But also, like if they're wanting to do it on the computer, great, here's my computer, give it to them, opposed to like expecting to just send it over virtually and have them do it themselves while they're there. Like, just give them your computer and then you can kind of walk through it as you go. Other than that, I mean, I've been agent for 2 years, but definitely takes some legwork to continue to keep pushing in it, but it is possible. And also, my one thing would be make sure that you have your right to represent form signed. And as much as you feel like trusting someone and thinking they're going to use you, my own sister bought a house last month with someone else.
Oh, no.
So,
no.
yeah. So I would always just make sure, no matter who it is, family or friend, always have that form signed, because it can definitely hurt a relationship, whether you think it will or not. It's kind of a punch to the gut, so that's my only
Did she
thing.
just like buy a new construction model or something, like?
So they won like that 10,000 Parade of Homes.
They did?
They did. So like last year they won it.
Whoa.
But so it was required that it had to be a new construction home, and it had to be like brand new, no one else could have lived in it. But their max was like, yeah, it's like it's not even just $10,000 just straight to any home. It has to be a brand new construction home, and like no one has to have lived in the home yet. Like, so it could be the model home if anything, but it has to be like first person. And then it couldn't exceed like a certain dollar amount, and then obviously what they were approved for. Well, I had sent them like, hey, like, how's North Branch? And they're like, probably too far. And I was like, okay, cool, whatever. Turns out a family friend of ours who got her license, my sister ended up seeing her, and then she was like, oh, but there's this new construction in your price range, same house, They end up looking, they end up signing, but they were also like frustrated because they were only approved for FHA. So we were looking at FHA homes in the cities. A lot of them are gonna have peeled paint, a lot of them are gonna have those red flag things where it's like, we could certainly put an offer on a home, however, unfortunately, because it's FHA, most people are going to gear more towards a conventional because they don't have to put that much work into the home or these requirements. And so they were more frustrated that the homes that were actually within their minimal price range were not available, and then they were able to find a new construction that could bring the cost down with their Parade of Homes grant, and
That is a punch.
that's okay. I learned my lesson. It's a lesson learned. So,
Get those buyer reps signed, no
Yes.
question.
so other than that, that would be my only suggestion. for now. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming to this.
I'm glad to
Hopefully
be
you
here.
feel a little refreshed on how to talk through all these forms tomorrow.
Yeah, I hadn't done a listing for a while, mostly done like buyer reps, but I reached out to Tasha, I'm like, I need a refresher on this, and she's like, come on over, but also,
Oh, good.
Melissa's doing this on Saturday, and I said, great, I'll do both.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect.
I got two little double dips in for the
Good.
weekend.
Your professionalism is shining through. I love it.
I'm excited, and we'll see, I'm hoping, I'm thinking we'll be getting papers signed tomorrow, but I also don't know if the wife is coming, because they're getting divorced, and so like, I mean, I could have him sign his portion, but then she would need to sign hers electronically, and then it's like, if it's not the same date, that would be a problem, right? With the dates on there?
It's not necessarily a problem because the last signature date makes it the contract effective date, and then you have to get it uploaded within 2 days of that.
Okay, but the dates that have to match each other at the top of the listing, those?
Well, and ideally we want them to match, but if they don't match, the dates on the front don't matter because the contract effective date is the
Okay.
last date of the
So
signature.
like if she signed on Monday, I have until Wednesday to submit paperwork.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And so, you can predate it for the
Mhm.
21st, but you may even just want to leave those blank.
Yeah.
And then fill it in once she has signed it.
Makes sense.
Good. All right. Well, enjoy this glorious weekend.
You as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Melissa.
you.
Yes, thanks, Heidi. I'm gonna log out of the Zoom now.
Good luck on your listing.